You're listening to Digital Now, an original business and technology podcast by Logic 2020. I'm your host, Matt Treville. Each episode, I'll be interviewing a new expert to learn more about industry trends, fascinating new tech, shifting customer expectations, and the steps every business can take to stay ahead. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the episode. We are here with Mick Wagner, who is one of our senior solution architects in our advanced analytics practice. He helps our clients with data strategy and solving complex business problems with simple technical solutions. Mick, welcome.
Thanks, Matt, for inviting me to the show. I'm excited to finally participate in this podcast for Logic 2020.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming along. How you doing?
Good. We are, right in the thick of things, and we're in a very exciting time and place now. Especially when it comes to data analytics with all the changes in technology and all the things that are available today that seemed, nearly impossible 5 years ago.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue. Thank you. You've helped me there, mate. So what's on your mind? It sounds like you started answering it already, but what's going on? Yeah,
so we have all these things that we can do, but in my last, 10 plus years of consulting, it's not working, right? So you sit with the businesses and they're simply not adopting the technology and really developing those types of, data cultures and data-driven decision-making as one would expect. And there's a lot of reasons for this, and it's not good because, the companies that are doing this are really kind of pushing the edge and seeing, faster growth, not only in market share, but in profitability, and even doing more innovative work. And so it's really unfortunate, right? Because we're not seeing our clients achieve everything that they could. And it's not that they're not trying. They've invested in all sorts of various ways. They've invested in the technology, they've invested in the cloud and the migration and getting everything up and running there. They've invested in data. They've either acquired data sets, clean data sets. They've hired brilliant data professionals. They've got that hotshot data scientist. They have all these folks. But frankly, they just haven't gotten the expected return on investment from all these different strategic moves and investments. And, you kind of start asking yourself, well, why is that, right? And so, when you sit in these important meetings, whether they're with executives or different analysts, and you listen to the way they discuss and they think and they make decisions, there's still data is not involved as one would think it would be, right? These teams, these leaders are still leaning on their experience and making, gut-based decision-making, which is fine. It has its place, but we would hope to see in some of these clients as they mature in their data experience or data journey, they're really kind of using the data to influence that kind of gut-based decision-making and really making better decisions.
Yeah, so why do you think this is happening? Like, what are the pain points here?
Well, it's really not a surprise. If you actually go and sit with the data analyst team, and you actually kind of watch the data and the decision-making roll through all the different processes, whether it's, the developers, pulling together the data, whether it's an analyst trying to, understand the data that's been pulled together, and then the executives taking that input and trying to make a decision, you'll see pretty quickly that it's quite disjointed, right? And it's disjointed in many ways. Some of the ways are really around the technology, and then how does the operating model tie into the technology. Some of it is, our roles are changing in kind of the modern workplace. This idea now that, only analysts can understand statistics and SQL just isn't true. Mm-hmm. As our world gets more complex and the data gets more complex, everyone really needs to have kind of that baseline understanding of statistics and of data literacy to really make good use of the data. So you're seeing all these areas where it just really doesn't line up. And so, let's look at just the technology one, because this is the one that everyone loves talking about. And you can find, 500 articles on the web or blogs talking about this new data and this new technology. And, every vendor is probably calling you, trying to get you to invest in the next thing. And so in the past, we actually lived in kind of a simpler world, and while it was more, restrictive for the type of analytics we could do, it was kind of simpler. You were an Oracle house, you were a SQL Server house, and being in Seattle, we've always kind of had clients that were SQL Server houses. And so how that world would work is that you would buy into your single stack. You would kind of have all the different tools you need to kind of go from end to end. Now, they weren't necessarily always the best tools, but everything kind of played nicely together, and that was kind of that. Well, back, around, 10 years ago, the whole big data revolution and the idea of, moving everything to the cloud and storage got cheap, and that kind of required a change in mindset of how these technologies come together. Mm-hmm. Not going into all the details, it is pretty fascinating looking at which kind of core achievements kind of change this technology. What you have today is a huge list of technologies. One of the VC firms puts together a list of, these are the critical big data technologies, or these are the critical MarTech technologies. And if you look at it from 10 years ago, there's probably like, 15 technologies on there. Can't get your head wrapped around. You look at it now, it's like 500.
Wow.
And, now we've moved from this kind of single stack mentality to best tool for the specific use case for this purpose. Mm-hmm. And you're starting to see it shift back to being more of a, well, which cloud provider are you going with? Oh, that cloud provider, as part of their business model, makes it incredibly sticky to use kind of all their tools and whatnot, but they may not be the best. And so what we're seeing is that from a solutions architecture technology point of view, what the CIOs and the CTOs are doing is really, taking that best tool for the job they have and bringing it all together. So, which is great. It opens up a lot of doors, but now you're spending all this time trying to get all this technology to work, where in the past it was really about kind of, getting, as a developer, it was just sort of getting the end-to-end stack to work. But now I see my developers spending more of their time just getting the different technologies to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And ironically, it usually involves learning another new technology. And as, all these investments are kind of moving forward,
yeah,
which technologies are going to be kind of solid or safe for a vast number of years. So ironically, you see a lot of our clients thinking more about portability and open source and, all these sorts of things. So the short of it is, it's really complex.
Yeah.
And so what you see is that disjointedness that the developers have to work with essentially permeates through the entire decision-making process. And so a really good example that I like to give is thinking about if you are a business user, right, and you have a decision you need to make, and so say you are a product manager and you want to evaluate how well your product is doing. When I sat with some of our folks out with one of our telecom clients and kind of watched how they do this. And, they pull up one report here, and they know this number is good, and I trust that number, and I know what to do with that number. Oh, the rest of it is kind of not for me. It doesn't really matter. And then they pull up another report, and they kind of look at this, and they pull this one number. Then they go to like another web service, and maybe that's not quite right, so they scrape it down into an Excel spreadsheet, and they kind of mash it all together. They make a decision and they kind of roll with it. But then if someone goes, oh, we'll explain that, how to do this and that, just kind of starts to kind of fall apart. Mm. And so very quickly you kind of they have their process, someone else has their process. And when you have these discussions, it's hard to trust the data. Like, I know this sounds like the same thing I would have said, 15 years ago, but having everyone in the room having their answer based on their data, which is wildly different than the conclusions everyone else drew because the data was somewhat different for various reasons. And so when you're looking at all that, you can see pretty quickly that this experience is just not very easy to use. And so it's a high hurdle to clear. And if your data isn't trustworthy, if it's not actually getting that benefit, or if you don't know how to monitor and measure if you're getting that benefit, you can see why no one's actually using this.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. If it's all over the shop, what your data sources, how you're gonna make those decisions. So who does this impact?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the developers, and so what happens for the developers is that they need to learn a lot of new technology, and this has always been the case in development. I've told my team, you've joined a journey of continuous improvement and continuous learning, and new technologies come out. But I think the amount that people have had to pick up has probably grown by 3 or 4-fold, right?
Hmm.
So what you'll do is you'll kind of find people kind of figuring out their camps and kind of where they want to work in. But what will happen is they're not going to be building the most optimal code because they're just not going to know it. They kind of need to know everything at a low level, and it's just very intensive for themselves to understand. From essentially for a business user, that experience is kind of what we described before, where you're pulling from all these different data sets. But if you're like, say an analyst, and you're trying to build the best dashboard to help drive this solution to, help your financial team, identify fraud or something like that. You're still kind of picking and choosing, and it's really hard to actually have something well-defined for your use case to go to market. So this isn't something that's just a developer issue or just a business issue. It's really kind of hitting across the entire business as a whole as they make decisions.
To everyone, yeah. So can you, I'm getting the idea here, but can you touch upon, why we should care and why this is important?
Yeah, so if we go back, and this is kind of one of the areas where I felt a little jealous of some of the other kind of business functions and groups, but, if we go back and think about if you're designing a product or application, there's this heavy focus on UI and UX. And really focusing on that user-centered experience and design. And the short of it is, right, the experience that you have will impact the trust that you have in the tool, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have trust, you're not going to use the tool, and then you're not going to have access to the data. And so why should we care? All this investment has happened, and we're getting no use out of it, right? And what usually happens is, the tech folks will be in their camp and they'll say, well, we built it, it's great, we're going to use it, figure it out. The business group will be like, I don't have time to pick up a new thing, this needs to be more catered to kind of what I need. And so that gap is sort of the reason why, a lot of these investments just won't really see the return that they're expecting. And so what will happen, this is actually starting to happen, right? So if you're on the tech side of the house, your investments are going to dry up. The business is going to eventually stop investing in new technology, and you're going to have less people and you're going to have less resources to work with. But from a business perspective, and McKinsey did a brilliant study a few years back, but it kind of showed what is the difference between the top tier companies that use data to drive their business and those who don't, right? And it's not a huge number, but you have to remember this number compounds.
Yeah.
So 3% advantage one year, well, that will result in a slightly bigger advantage the next year. You start adding all this stuff up, and if you're not ready to go and you haven't put in that investment, a lot of these companies are just going to get crushed. I mean, this isn't completely representative, but you think about the way that Amazon and their retail business can focus in so closely on what people need, and whether it's the old classic machine learning they did on, customers who bought this will like this. But all that builds that pattern, that behavior, the comment everyone loves to talk about, data being the new fuel in the current generation. All that sort of adds up, right? And it gets so big, you'll have companies like, Sears and Macy's, which we're running with Amazon analogy, just can't catch up. You can't just suddenly go, oh, cool, well, now we're interested in doing this, we want to do this. It is a long-term investment. So people really should care about not just the, essentially the new data platform or the next-gen data platform, but they really need to focus in on what is the data experience that people are having.
Yeah. And that's going to, obviously, adoption to any technology is the success, right? You have to use it for it to be valuable. Yeah. Okay. So how would someone get started to improve the data experience?
Yeah, and there's a lot of places to start here. So I'll run through a few of them, right? And so one of the things that we do a lot when we're working with our clients is that there may be the best solution that we're pulling together 15 technologies to solve this problem. That's really the one we'll go with, right? There are a lot of advantages to having things that will play nicely together. And so you need to take a real holistic look of the solution that you are presenting, and making sure that you're willing to make some sacrifices on perhaps performance or those other things to make it more usable, right? And so getting rid of that disjointedness for your developers early on will make it easier for them to make quicker changes and truly be more agile in their development. So they can make the changes that align with the business, and it kind of all starts there. So that's a common thing that we'll ask all of our architects and lead developers to do is like, okay, cool, we're going to help you guys design and build something. But when we leave, who's running this? Like if we're working with a team of people who are entirely SQL based, we probably shouldn't design and build a solution in Python, even though it might be better because we've now handed a bigger issue to our client when they think about, okay, how are we now going to hire or train up these folks? And so that's one component to look at is making sure that you're looking at where you can make sacrifices in such things as performance or features to actually get better usage. Another aspect that I think is kind of interesting too is we talked about that kind of product manager who goes to Adobe to pull their usage for their product. They might go to a financial dashboard to kind of pull together what are they looking at from performance and customer acquisition cost and whatnot. They might have to go to a tool like Zuora or something to scrape together their essentially their subscription data and how everything comes together. Well, we talked about starting at the beginning, which is on the development and technology side. Well, we can also start at the end, and that's how do you bring all this stuff together? And so this is where utilizing both technology and process is really important. So from a process perspective, one of the things that we really enjoy doing is leveraging what all of our friends in the UI UX world did 10 years ago. And it's really thinking about personas and how do you design something and acknowledging that, this isn't like 6 years ago where it was really hard to build a dashboard or more challenging. You can build multiple dashboards for multiple people, and with a well thought out design and data sharing and whatnot, you can create custom experiences tailored towards that individual. And when you do that, the biggest thing that you accomplish is that you're working with them, you're making it easier for them to provide requirements for you while making the requirements you give the developer more accurate. Mm-hmm. And so coming up with those kind of custom tailored designs and bringing all that together at the initial design stage is really critical. But also, there may be cases where it's just, the company's already invested in Tableau. Tableau's kind of doing some of the stuff. They've already invested in Click or Power BI. Those are already doing this. Oh, yeah, and we got Adobe, so they're doing their thing. So we found that a good, easy win is to use a tool such as a analytics hub, which will kind of create this kind of seamless web experience where you can pull in all those different dashboards and data into a single place. And so that's a great way, too, where you can take those, you can reshift them, and we've done some work with our partner, Zen Optics, and kind of thinking about how do you create workflows that more closely mimic the actual analyst and what they do instead of just kind of throwing them a bunch of stuff and hoping they can kind of figure it out. So those are kind of the two ways to kind of get kind of quick wins, kind of early on the tech side and on the business side, but those are really only going to get you so far. The next steps are things you need to think of as being, my gosh, I wish I could say it was a 6-month investment, but it's probably really more like an 18-month and 3-year investment. And this is where you need to rethink not only your operating model and how it is that all these things kind of come together. And there's all sorts of exciting things that people are doing now, whether it's thinking about, having and this concept's been around for a while, but coming up with like a center of excellence where you're kind of using that as a tool mechanism to kind of standardize different concepts. You have the data mesh approach where you're essentially pushing out to the different domain groups and using like a domain-centered approach. You have all these different techniques and processes. You have kind of at a higher level treating everything with a product management lens, right? And becoming very focused on being customer first and figuring out how all that works. These are all big changes. And these are all big changes that we've seen clients go to implement at different stages, and understanding the different maturity points and what they would achieve and how you get there. It's a big commitment. It's not something that can be done with one group or two groups. It really needs to kind of come from the top down. Now, some of the things you can do from the bottom up when it comes to this is really focusing in on culture change. And so how is it that a engineering manager, a VP of a group, or a director of the data analytics team can kind of start to make these changes, right? And so when we look at this, this sounds really buzzy, but thinking about how do you develop that culture of innovation? How do you encourage and inspire experimentation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a very different mindset. Depending upon the types of folks you've hired and their background, will kind of tell you how fast they can adapt to this. Coming from engineering and science, for me, it was very, very simple to think, oh, hypothesis, data to prove it, experiment, do it. Okay, now what? And so that's like a very basic kind of scientific kind of thinking process. But when you're dealing with data, all that becomes really, really helpful. So that's one way to kind of think about is how do you find those small wins within your own team, whether it's doing the agile implementation and really getting truly agile with that experimentation, or whether it's thinking about things through a product lens. All these are kind of little things that can be done to kind of get the ball moving.
You know what I love about all this, Mick? I know it's very technical and you need to have the right people to be able to implement all this sort of stuff, but at its core, it's very simple and logical, like what you're trying to achieve, right? Adoption, you have to know where the data is, you have to be able to see it to make their business decisions. I just love that part of it, maybe because I'm not a technical person myself, so that helps me, but I love it. So one final thing I like to ask all my guests is if you could leave the audience here with one thought, what would it be?
Oh, wow, just one thought.
I know it's going to be tough, but you could do it.
I think the big thing to take away from this, and we've shared some articles about this, and we're going to be coming up with some more blog posts on this, is, don't just think about the technology. Don't just think about the investment, but it's worth your time to actively be reviewing the data experience from all the key players involved when they're interacting in this. And I think mostly when people do take that step back, and whether they're doing internal consulting or hiring people to do it, or bringing in outside experts, you very quickly will learn so much by looking at what the experience is for different kind of key individuals, and that will kind of guide you or reinforce the decisions you've already made and where you want to make your investments. So we're always looking for data leaders to kind of work with and share ideas and whatnot. So if you ever want to network or meet with anyone from our team, you want to talk about the technology or the implementation side, feel free to email me at mickw@logic2020.com.
Mick, thank you so much for your time today, mate. This was fantastic. Definitely have to do it again sometime. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks, Matt.
You've been listening to Logic 2020's podcast, Digital Now. To learn more, visit our website at logic2020.com or follow us on social media. See you next time.